I stood at the gate of Charleston Naval Base, listening to the guard repeat words I'd heard my entire life. "Ma'am, I don't see your name here." His clipboard tilted toward me, polite but firm, as if showing me the list might help me understand my own absence. The leather bag in my hand suddenly felt heavier. Behind him, through the glass doors of the ceremony hall, I could hear the brass band warming up, bursts of laughter punctuating the notes, the faint clinking of champagne flutes already in motion. They were honoring my father inside that building. Captain Robert Caldwell, the legend of Charleston Navy Yard, the man whose name still commanded attention in rooms he hadn't entered in years. And beside him, my brother, Lieutenant Commander David Caldwell, the proud heir to that legacy, the son who'd done everything right. Me? Not on the list, not in the speeches, not even in the story they were telling themselves. Through the glass, I watched my father shake hands with a senior officer, his posture flawless even at 73, pride radiating from every calculated gesture. When his eyes swept toward the entrance, they passed over me like I was part of the reflection, not the room. Behind him, David smiled under the stage lights, surrounded by photographs captioned, "The Caldwell Men Who Served." 3 generations of Navy uniforms, 3 generations of duty and sacrifice. Once again, I was the gap in their family portrait. I looked down at the Navy ID in my hand, the letters catching the morning sun like a quiet protest. Evelyn M. Caldwell. The name felt like a stranger's suddenly, someone I'd been trying to prove existed for 35 years. I didn't plead with the guard, didn't pull out my phone to call my mother, to ask her to vouch for me one more time. I just drew a steady breath and whispered under my breath, low enough that only I could hear. Maybe they never learned who I became. Then I turned away from the gate, not to leave Charleston, but to come back on my own terms. Because after 3.5 decades of living like a woman who didn't deserve to be seen, I'd finally understood something. I wasn't invisible by accident. They had erased me on purpose, and that meant I could rewrite myself just as deliberately. The house I grew up in sat right by the Cooper River, a white 2-story with wide windows that framed the water like paintings. Every morning of my childhood started the same way. The sharp rhythm of my father's boots against the hardwood floors, moving from bedroom to kitchen with military precision. He lived by discipline, breathed through duty, raised us on a creed so simple it might as well have been carved into the foundation. Caldwell men never bend. Men. The word always hung there like a wall I couldn't see but kept walking into anyway. Even as a child, I understood I was an exception, not an heir. While David ran through the backyard with model warships, reenacting battles he'd read about in our father's old strategy manuals, I sat on the porch steps with those same manuals, tracing the faded maps with my finger. I liked decoding things, seeing patterns other people overlooked. I liked the idea that wars could be won with information, not just bullets. When I was 12, my father took David to the naval base for the first time. He introduced him to officers as the next Caldwell in uniform, and David stood there beaming, shoulders back, chin up. I stood beside my mother in a plain white dress, hands folded, trying to make myself smaller. My father added, almost kindly, "She's bright, but she's not built for command." It wasn't just a comment. It was a verdict, the kind that followed you into every room after that, whispering in your ear that you'd already been measured and found wanting. From then on, I learned to avoid the gatherings, to step out of the frame when the camera clicked. My mother would whisper that he didn't mean any harm, that he just worried about me in ways he didn't know how to express. But unintentional wounds still leave scars, and scars don't care about intent. I was 8 years old the first time I felt invisible. Thanksgiving dinner, the whole family gathered around the oak table my father had built from wood salvaged off a decommissioned destroyer. He told Navy stories that night, his voice deep and resonant, filling every corner of the room. David sat at his right, 11 years old, and soaking up every word like gospel. I sat at the far end beside my mother picking at my mashed potatoes. When I asked a question about a tactical maneuver he'd just described, my father smiled gently and said, "Sweetheart, don't worry about those things. You just need to learn how to take care of a family." My mother placed her hand over mine, a small gesture, gone in a second. But I understood. Don't argue. This is how things are. The real break came when I was 16. My father took David to the naval base on a Saturday morning, just the two of them. They came back after midnight laughing, clapping each other on the back. David talked nonstop about the ships, the officers, the future waiting for him. The next morning at breakfast, my father made the announcement: David's going to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. That's the Caldwell legacy. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, my hands moving automatically. But inside, something cracked. That night, I asked my mother if I could join the Navy. She looked at me for a long time, then spoke softly. Evie, your father has certain ideas, but you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to be yourself. But I did need to prove something. Not to them, to myself, to the girl who kept getting erased from the story. When I turned 18, my father used $45,000 from the college fund my grandparents had left for both of us. All of it went to David's tuition at Annapolis. My share? Evie doesn't need that money. She'll get married. I heard him say it to my mother one night, standing outside their bedroom door, my hand frozen on the doorknob. I didn't confront him, didn't cry. I just walked back to my room, opened my laptop, and started filling out scholarship applications. I worked 3 part-time jobs, paid my own way through the College of Charleston, and never said a word about the money. That was the first time I learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. At 22, I received 2 pieces of mail in the same week. The first was David's acceptance letter to the Naval Academy. Charleston erupted. Flags hung from every porch on our street. My father threw a barbecue, invited the whole neighborhood. In his speech, he said, "Today, another Caldwell steps into the ranks of the great men who've served this country." I couldn't be prouder. I stood at the edge of the yard with a paper plate, watching people toast my brother. No one asked what I was doing after graduation. The second piece of mail came 3 days later. I opened it alone in my bedroom, sitting on the floor with my back against the bed. The subject line read, "Official Invitation, Naval Intelligence Command." My heart hammered as I read the words. "Dear Miss Caldwell, based on your exceptional performance in computer science and strategic analysis, we are pleased to invite you to join the United States Naval Intelligence with the position of Electronic Signals Analyst." I read it 3 times. Then I looked out my window at the house where my father was still laughing with guests at David's celebration party. I didn't tell anyone. I just wrote a short note on a piece of notebook paper. "Dad, I'm joining the Navy too. I'll serve in my own way. Evelyn." The morning I left Charleston, my father stood on the porch, arms crossed, face like granite. "Don't waste your time sitting behind computer screens, Evelyn. Men fight on the front lines. Women just support." I looked him in the eye for the first time in my life. "Maybe I'm not the kind of woman you think, Dad." Then I got in the taxi and didn't look back. Washington didn't smell like the ocean, but it carried the same weight of order, the same sense that every action mattered. The first years at Naval Intelligence were long and sterile. Windowless rooms, rows of monitors, coded chatter in my headset. My job was to analyze electronic behavior, tracking unidentified vessels across thousands of miles of open water. People called it desk work, but one wrong command could sink a ship. One overlooked signal could cost lives. I lived in a studio apartment in Arlington, $1,200 a month, barely big enough for a bed and a desk. I drove a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper I never bothered to fix. I wore the same 3 pairs of work slacks on rotation, ate frozen dinners most nights, saved every dollar I could. In my 4th year, my salary hit $68,000. By year 10, $95,000. By year 15, $135,000. I lived modestly, invisibly, but I'd saved $240,000. A safety net for a future no one knew I was building. In my 4th year, I was assigned to Operation Deep Current, a mission classified beyond the clearance level most officers would ever see. A SEAL team, 8 men, had gone missing off the coast of Somalia. Radio signals scrambled, no communication. Pentagon in full crisis mode. I sat at my station for 39 hours straight. Eyes burning, hands shaking from too much coffee and adrenaline. My supervisor told me to take a break. I refused. At 3 in the morning on the 3rd day, I found it. A jamming frequency from a Chinese fishing vessel 12 nautical miles away. I pinpointed the source, rerouted the interference, reopened the channel. 17 minutes later, the SEAL team was extracted. all 8 men alive. The report listed only one word under mission coordinator: Spectre. 3 months later, a letter arrived at my office. No return address, just handwriting in thick black ink. Whoever you are, Spectre, you saved all of us. We have wives, we have kids. They still have husbands and fathers because of you. We'll never forget. I folded the letter carefully, locked it in my desk drawer, and cried for the first time in years. Every month, my mother called. The conversations followed the same pattern. "How are you, Evie?" "I'm good, Mom." Then she'd say, "Your father's very proud of David. He just got promoted. They're going to feature him in the local paper." Once I almost said it. "What about me, Mom? I just saved 8 lives." But I just smiled at the window, watching the flag outside my building shift in the night wind, and said, "I know, Mom. I'm happy for David." Silence, always silence. 15 years passed like that. I saved people who would never know my name. I lost my place in the only story that was supposed to include me. But late at night, I'd open that letter again, trace the words with my fingertip under my desk lamp. The silver pin on my uniform would catch the light, a faint reflection against my chest. "Maybe the world doesn't have to see me," I whispered to myself once. "But one day, they'll have to face me." 4 years had passed since I last saw Charleston when my mother's letter arrived. Folded carefully, sealed in quiet defiance, she wrote that my father would be honored, that David would stand beside him, and then she added in her smallest, most familiar handwriting, "If you come, please don't say anything that might upset him." I read that line a dozen times. It sounded like every Sunday dinner I'd ever sat through. Every phone call that ended before I could finish a sentence. "Don't upset him." The words that built the walls of our house. I folded the letter, set it on my dashboard, and looked out across the Potomac River. Sunlight scattered across the surface like shards of glass, too bright to look at for long. Somewhere beyond that water was the house where my father still woke before dawn, straightened the flag on the porch, made the world stand at attention. There was no formal invitation, no phone call, just the reminder not to make trouble. I picked up my phone but didn't call, didn't need to explain, didn't need permission. This time, I won't stand outside the gate hoping to be let in. This time, I'll walk in as who I really am. 3 weeks after leaving Charleston, I received an encrypted call from Atlantic Command. The voice was short, impersonal. "Commander Caldwell, report to Norfolk HQ. Orders classified. Stand by." I drove 4 hours from DC to Norfolk, heart racing the entire way. Did I do something wrong? Am I being investigated? The conference room was silent when I entered, the kind of silence that absorbs every sound. 3 senior officers stood waiting behind a table of dark wood. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cold metal. The officer in the center, Admiral Patterson, opened a file. "Evelyn Caldwell, 15 years of exceptional service. For extraordinary contributions to Operation Trident Veil, Operation Deep Current, and 23 other classified missions, you are hereby promoted to Rear Admiral, effective immediately." Time froze. They handed me a small silver box. Inside, the insignia gleamed, 3 stars, sharp, flawless, heavy with meaning. I raised my right hand, saluted, held my breath as the paperwork was signed. No applause, no cameras, only the sound of pen on paper and the echo of my own heartbeat. As I turned to leave, Admiral Patterson called out, "Admiral Caldwell, some of the men you saved still talk about Spectre." I froze, turned back. They wanted me to pass along their thanks. From SEAL Team 5, Team 8, Team 3. And from 47 families who still have husbands and fathers because of you. His voice cracked slightly. "Thank you, Spectre, for staying in the dark so we could live in the light." That night, I opened the box again in my apartment. The 3 stars reflected in the mirror, scattering light across the room like a quiet storm. I held one in my palm, cool and heavy, and whispered to myself, "They think I'm just a girl sitting behind a screen. They don't know Evelyn Caldwell just became one of the most powerful officers in the Navy. And tomorrow, they're going to have to see it." Charleston woke clear and metallic that morning, the sunlight cutting across the Cooper River like sharpened glass. I drove slowly over the Ravenel Bridge, passing rows of white uniforms marching toward the base. Their laughter drifted through the air, confident, easy, belonging. At the gate, a banner waved above the crowd, the Caldwell family celebration, honoring 3 generations of naval service. Below it, a massive poster, my father in his captain's dress whites, beside David in his lieutenant commander's uniform, both standing tall, proud. I wasn't in the photograph. I parked far from the entrance, letting the car idle. The sound of brass instruments floated from the hall, distant but distinct. I could almost hear my father's laugh in the rhythm of it, that familiar pride echoing across the years. When I finally stepped out, the wind smelled of salt and oil, heavy with memory. The security officer, a young man around 23, looked up from his clipboard. "Name, ma'am?" "Caldwell. Evelyn Caldwell." He scanned down the list, scanned back up, frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't see that name here." The words landed soft but familiar. I smiled, not at him, but at the irony behind me. My father's voice carried through the speakers. "Today, we honor the legacy of the Caldwell men, those who have served this country with honor and courage across 3 generations." A chorus of glasses clinked, laughter rippled out. The gate swung open for another family, then closed again with a groan of iron. "Thank you," I said quietly. The officer looked confused. "You can contact the event coordinator if you'd like." "No need." I turned back toward the car, but not to leave. I opened the trunk. Inside lay my dress whites, perfectly pressed, the navy box beside them. I lifted the lid. 3 silver stars gleamed cold in the Charleston light. I changed right there, shielded by the open trunk door. Every button felt like a pulse under my skin. This wasn't a costume. It was truth I'd earned in silence. When I pinned the insignia to my shoulders, the 3 stars were heavier than I'd expected. Not from the weight of metal, from the weight of 15 years. I took out a small silver coin, edges worn smooth, engraved on it, "To Spectre, you saved us all. SEAL Team 5. I pinned it to my uniform right over my heart. Looked in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Evie anymore, the forgotten daughter. She was Rear Admiral Evelyn Caldwell, United States Navy. "Maybe the world doesn't need to see me," I whispered. "But today, they're going to have to face me." When I reached the gate again, my heels struck the pavement in a steady rhythm. The security officer looked up. His eyes went wide. I didn't speak, just held out my ID. "Rear Admiral Evelyn Caldwell, proceeding to the ceremony." He stared at the ID. At me. Back at the ID. His hand trembled as he lifted his radio. Main gate calling. Rear Admiral Caldwell requesting entry. Confirm?" A voice crackled back. "Confirmed. Grant access immediately. Over." He swallowed hard. "Admiral, I apologize for earlier. I didn't know." No one did. The gate opened. I walked through. The band shifted to anchors away as my steps matched the rhythm. I wasn't entering their story. I was reclaiming mine. The hall glowed gold beneath rows of flags. In the center, a banner read, "Honoring the Caldwell Legacy of Naval Service." My father stood at the podium, voice commanding, proud. For generations, the Caldwell men have served with courage and valor. Applause thundered at that word. Men. I stepped into the light. The silver on my shoulders caught the glow. The host turned, stammering, Admiral." Every conversation fell silent as I walked down the aisle. My heels echoed in the sudden quiet. Then from the right, a man rose. Scarred face, squared jaw, recognition in his eyes. "Rear Admiral Caldwell, ma'am." Chairs scraped in unison. 300 Navy SEALs stood tall, hands snapping to their foreheads in perfect salute. The sound was a tide of steel and reverence shaking the walls. "Rear Admiral Caldwell, front row." My father froze mid-toast, the glass trembling in his hand. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, eyes wide with tears. David sat pale, lost for words. I reached the front where an older admiral stood and nodded. "Welcome home, Admiral." I sat in the front row, removed my cap, placed it on my lap. Silence rippled again, then applause returned. Hesitant at first, then roaring, rising like the sea. I didn't look at my family. Didn't need to. For the first time, the room saw me. Justice, I realized, wasn't revenge. It was simply standing where they once refused to let you stand. I touched the silver stars on my shoulder, steady as breath. They tried to erase me. Now they'll have to remember. Word count, 3,045. Target, 6,000, 7,000. Continuing. The room held its breath long after the applause died. Golden light shimmered against rows of medals, bouncing off my own silver stars until it painted me into the picture they'd tried to keep me out of. I didn't rise or bow. I sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the stage where my father stood frozen, his glass half raised. That look, I knew it too well. Not pride, not anger, just disbelief. the kind that forces a man to see the truth he spent a lifetime denying. David sat off to the side, shoulders drawn in, as if realizing that every story he'd been told was missing a chapter. The host cleared his throat, voice shaking. "Admiral Caldwell, we're honored by your presence." I gave a slight nod. Nothing more. Let the silence do its work. My father set his glass down carefully, like it might shatter if he moved too fast. He stepped back from the podium without finishing his speech. For the first time in my life, I watched Robert Caldwell retreat from a stage. The program continued, but the energy had shifted. Every speaker kept glancing at me, adjusting their prepared remarks. When they said Caldwell Legacy, it no longer meant just the men. The word had expanded, whether they were ready for it or not. As America the Beautiful filled the hall, I placed my hand over my chest, feeling the cool edge of the 3 stars beneath my palm. The coin from SEAL Team 5 pressed against my heart like a second pulse. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was part of the story. When the ceremony ended, voices returned like soft waves breaking on a dock. People approached carefully, respectfully. Officers I'd never met shook my hand. A few whispered, "We've heard about Spectre. Thank you for your service." I waited until most had left before I heard my brother behind me. "How long have you been keeping this a secret?" 15 years. He gave a small, uneven laugh, the sound of a man realizing he'd been living in a smaller world than he thought. "Guess you were always 10 steps ahead of me." His eyes fell. I just never looked close enough. I rested a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't supposed to. Dad made sure of that." He nodded and walked away, shoulders heavy. Not angry, just hollow. Learning what it meant to be proud of something built on someone else's silence. Then my father approached. The hall was nearly empty now, sunlight catching in the glass behind him. He stopped in front of me, eyes moving from the insignia on my shoulders to my face. No words, no hesitation. He raised his right hand in a perfect salute. I returned it, posture firm, breath steady. For a moment, we stood facing each other. 2 officers, 2 lives divided by pride, finally meeting as equals. He didn't call me daughter. He didn't have to in that silent exchange. He gave me the one thing I'd wanted all my life: respect. Later that evening, I drove to a small hotel near the base. Not back to my childhood home. Not yet. I needed space to let the day settle into my bones. The room was plain, beige walls, a bed with a floral comforter that had seen better years. I sat on the edge, still in my uniform, and pulled out my phone. 87 missed messages, texts from numbers I didn't recognize, emails piling up faster than I could read. One subject line caught my eye, from SEAL Families United at gmail.com. I opened it. "Dear Admiral Caldwell, we are the families of the men you saved over the past 15 years. Our husbands, our fathers, our brothers. They came home because of you. They held their children because of you. They walked their daughters down the aisle because of you. You weren't in their photographs, but you're in our hearts forever. Thank you, Spectre. Thank you for staying in the dark so we could have light." Below the message were 47 signatures. I read every name, traced each one with my finger. Then I closed the laptop and let myself cry. Not from sadness, from relief. From the weight of being known, finally, by people who understood what I'd given. My phone rang. My mother. I hesitated, then answered. "Evie." Her voice was soft, trembling. "Can you come home? Your father wants to talk to you." Silence stretched between us. "He hasn't eaten since last night. He just sits there, looking at your picture. The one from today." "What did you say to him?" "Nothing. I didn't have to. He sees you now, Evie, not as his daughter, as who you are." I wiped my eyes, cleared my throat. "I'll come tomorrow." That night, I stood on the hotel balcony overlooking the Cooper River. The same river I'd grown up beside, the same water that carried ships to war and back. Somewhere out there, in the dark, men were still serving, still risking everything. And somewhere, in rooms without windows, analysts like I'd been were keeping them safe. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat on the porch steps with strategy manuals, trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense of her. The one who learned to be quiet because loud girls got punished. That girl was gone, but she'd built something in her absence. She'd built me. The next morning, I drove to the house on the river. The same winding road, the same oak trees, the same flag waving steady on the porch. Inside, my mother was cooking pot roast, the smell warm and heavy in the air. My father sat in the living room, silent, a metal case on the table. But the glass cabinet behind him had changed. David's photo was still there, but at the center now hung mine. Full dress whites, 3 silver stars. Beneath it, Pia a tu Maria, a plaque that read Rear Admiral Evelyn Caldwell, United States Navy. I looked at my mother. She just smiled, eyes wet. My father stood, approached slowly. Do they still call you Spectre? Sometimes. He nodded once. You did well, Admiral. No more words, none were needed. That night, we ate together for the first time in years. No ranks, no pride, no silence. Just family. David brought his wife and 2 children. Jake, 8 years old, asked 100 questions about ships and submarines. Emma, 5, climbed into my lap and asked if I was a real admiral. Yes, sweetheart. Did you save people? I did. How come nobody knew? I smoothed her hair, feeling the weight of the question. Because the most important things aren't always the ones people see, but they still matter. She thought about that, then smiled. You're like a secret superhero. I laughed, the sound unfamiliar in my own chest. Yeah, I guess I am. David sat beside me later, voice low. Thank you, Evie, for showing my kids a better example than I ever could. After dinner, I walked outside. The river was black under the night sky. The same stars I used to wish on as a girl now scattered overhead like broken glass. I thought about the men who'd saluted me, the families who'd written, the father who'd finally looked at me and seen not a disappointment, but a daughter worth honoring. I thought about the years of silence, the nights I'd questioned whether it was worth it, whether anyone would ever know. And I realized something profound. They didn't erase me, they just made me invisible. And in that invisibility, I became stronger than anything they could imagine. Spectre was never the name of failure, it was the name of freedom. 2 days later, I received a call from the Pentagon. A woman's voice, professional but warm. Admiral Caldwell, we'd like to invite you to speak at the Women in Military Leadership Conference next month. 2,000 female officers will be in attendance. I paused, looking out my hotel window at the Charleston skyline. I'll do it. Over the following weeks, letters poured in. Young women in the Navy, girls in high school ROTC programs, mothers who'd served and been told they didn't belong. Your story showed me that silence isn't weakness. You proved that the strongest power is what people don't see. I answered every letter personally, not with advice, with truth. Don't let anyone define your worth. Let your work speak. And remember, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. 3 months after the ceremony, the Naval Academy at Annapolis invited me to address the incoming class. 500 midshipmen, first years, faces full of hope and hunger for purpose. When I walked into the auditorium, the lights blazed. 500 young people, men and women, stood in unison. Not because I was an admiral, because they knew who I was. I stood at the podium without notes, just spoke from the heart. You think leadership is standing in front of a crowd, being seen, having your name in the paper? I spent 15 years in the dark. No one knew my face. My family didn't know what I did. I wasn't in the photos, I wasn't in the story. But I saved lives. 47 families still have their loved ones because of work I did in a room with no windows. And that is the only thing that matters. Sometimes the greatest strength is what no one sees. But don't be mistaken. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It's a choice. And when the time comes, when you've built enough strength in the shadows, step into the light with everything you are. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Don't let anyone erase your name from the story. 'Cause you don't need permission to be great. You just need this. I touched my chest, over my heart. The room was silent for 3 seconds. Then 500 people rose as one, applause like thunder. But what I remembered most wasn't the sound. It was the look in their eyes. Not admiration, understanding. That morning, as I drove out of Charleston for the last time, my mother stood on the porch, waving. My father stood beside her. For the first time, I saw him not as the captain who commanded our house, but as an old man waving goodbye to his daughter. As I crossed the Ravenel Bridge, the sun climbed higher, turning the cables into threads of silver. I rolled down the window, let the wind carry in the scent of salt and the cry of gulls. In the distance, Sullivan's Island Lighthouse cut through the fog, steady and unmoving. I thought about the hall, the scrape of chair, the flash of light on my shoulders. The moment 300 seals stood as one, I didn't want to forget it, but I didn't need to live there anymore. For years, I thought silence was my punishment. I whispered, half to the wind, half to myself. That day, I learned it was my power. I pressed the accelerator. The road stretched straight toward the sea. No applause, no spotlight, just the hum of the engine and a heart finally at peace. I'd lost years, but I'd found myself. And this time, no one could take that away. The call came 4 days after I returned to Washington. I was in my Arlington apartment, unpacking the dress whites I'd worn in Charleston, when my phone vibrated against the kitchen counter. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Admiral Caldwell, this is Captain Morrison from the Secretary of the Navy's office. The Secretary requests your presence at a briefing tomorrow, 0900 hours. Pentagon, 3rd floor conference room Delta. The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down carefully, like it might detonate. In 15 years of service, I'd never been summoned to the Secretary's office. Analysts didn't get called upstairs unless something had gone catastrophically wrong or impossibly right. I spent that evening pulling files, reviewing my recent work, searching for anything that might explain the summons. But every mission was clean. Every operation closed without incident. At 8:45 the next morning, I stood outside Conference Room Delta in a freshly pressed uniform, the 3 stars on my shoulders still feeling like borrowed authority. The door opened before I could knock. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, extended her hand. Admiral Caldwell, I'm Dr. Patricia Chen, Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence Operations. Please come in. The room was smaller than I expected. Mahogany table, 6 leather chairs, a single window overlooking the parking lot. 3 people already seated. 2 admirals I recognized from joint operations briefings, and a civilian I didn't know. Dr. Chen gestured to a chair. We've been following your career with great interest, Admiral, particularly the work you did under the Spectre designation. My chest tightened. That call sign was supposed to be buried 6 layers deep in classified archives. She opened a folder, slid it across the table. We're launching a new initiative, Intelligence Task Force Phantom. Its mandate is to identify and neutralize emerging threats before they reach operational status. We need someone who understands how to work in the shadows. Someone who's already proven they can save lives without needing credit. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. You want me to disappear again? Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. We want you to lead. But yes, this work won't come with public recognition. It will, however, come with the resources and authority to prevent the kind of catastrophes that make headlines after it's too late. One of the admirals leaned forward, a man with iron gray hair and a face carved from weather. Admiral Caldwell, you saved 47 operators over your career. Imagine what you could do with a team of 20 analysts, direct satellite access, and liaison authority with every intelligence agency in the country. I let the silence stretch. Outside the window, a plane climbed into the pale morning sky, its contrails dissolving into nothing. How long would the assignment last? 3 years minimum, renewable based on threat assessment. And my public profile? Dr. Chen closed the folder. You'd maintain your rank and title, but the work itself stays classified. Your family, your friends, they'd know you're serving, but not where or how. So another 15 years of being invisible. The words came out sharper than I intended. Dr. Chen met my eyes without flinching. Not invisible, Admiral, indispensable. I thought about Charleston, about standing in that hall with 300 people on their feet, seeing me for the first time, about my father's salute, about Emma asking if I was a secret superhero. I thought about what it had cost to stay hidden for so long, and what it might cost to step back into the dark. I need 24 hours. Take 48. This isn't a decision to rush. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't drink and my phone in my hand. I almost called my mother 3 times, almost called David twice. But what would I say? That I was being offered another chance to be important in ways I couldn't explain? Instead, I opened my laptop and scrolled through the emails that had arrived since Charleston. 216 messages from people I'd never met. Women in uniform thanking me for showing them what was possible. Men writing to say their daughters had watched the news coverage and decided to apply to the Naval Academy. One email stopped me cold. The subject line read from Jake. I opened it. Dear Aunt Evie, Dad helped me write this. I wanted to say thank you for coming to dinner. I told my friends at school that my aunt is an admiral and she saved people and nobody knew. They think that's the coolest thing ever. I want to be like you when I grow up. Not famous, but important. Love, joyeux. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and made my decision. The next morning, I walked into Dr. Chen's office without an appointment. I'll take the position, but I have conditions. She gestured to a chair, her expression unreadable. I'm listening. First, I want quarterly briefings with the families of any operators we support. They don't need to know the details, but they deserve to know their loved ones have someone watching their backs. Dr. Chen made a note. Second, I want a mentorship program. Junior female analysts rotated through the task force every 6 months. They should see what leadership looks like at this level. Another note. Third, when this assignment ends, I want the option to teach at the War College. Not hide forever, pass on what I've learned. Dr. Chen set down her pen, a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. The secretary will approve all 3. Welcome to Task Force Phantom, Admiral. The work began immediately. My team assembled over the next month, 19 analysts, 1 operations coordinator, all handpicked from across the intelligence community. We set up shop in a converted office building in McLean, Virginia, 15 minutes from CIA headquarters, but technically independent of any single agency. Our mission was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Identify threats before they manifested. Stop catastrophes before they started. The first 6 months were brutal, 18-hour days. Analysts burning out and rotating home, leads that went nowhere, threats that materialized despite our best efforts. But then we started getting it right. In month 7, we identified a weapons shipment headed for a terrorist cell in Yemen, interdicted before it left port. In month 9, we traced a cyber attack back to its source and fed the information to NSA. They shut it down 3 hours before it would have crippled the East Coast power grid. In month 11, we located a missing CIA operative in Syria. SEAL Team 6 had him out in 36 hours. Word spread quietly through the intelligence community. When you needed something found, something stopped, something impossible made possible, you called Phantom. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that year, or Christmas. My mother's calls became shorter, more resigned. My father stopped asking when I'd visit. David sent photos of his kids, and I responded with brief texts. Proud of them. Miss you all. But I didn't miss the work. For the first time in my life, I was building something entirely my own. Not proving myself to my father, not living in my brother's shadow, just doing the job that needed doing. 18 months into the assignment, Dr. Chen appeared at my office door unannounced. I looked up from a threat assessment, already reading trouble in her expression. We have a situation. SEAL Team 8, training exercise off the North Carolina coast. One of their boats went dark 40 minutes ago. I was already pulling up satellite feeds before she finished speaking. What do we have? Last known position, weather data, and radio silence. Coast Guard is mobilizing, but the window is narrow. I brought my entire team online. We had access to real-time ocean current modeling, NOAA weather satellites, and underwater acoustic sensors that weren't supposed to exist. 3 of my analysts worked the currents. 2 tracked communication patterns for any SOS attempts. I pulled historical data on similar incidents, looking for patterns. At the 90-minute mark, one of my analysts, a young woman named Sarah Kim, called out, Admiral, I have an anomaly. Acoustic signature 12 nautical miles north-northwest of last known position. Could be engine trouble. I overlaid her data with the current models. They'd drift there if they lost power. Sarah, feed those coordinates to Coast Guard, now. She was already typing. Sent. 43 minutes later, Coast Guard found them. All 6 SEALs alive, engine flooded, taking on water. They'd been minutes from sinking. The thank you came through official channels, routed through 3 different offices to maintain operational security. But at the bottom of the memo, someone had added a single line in handwriting I recognized from a letter years ago. Spectre still watching over us. That night, I allowed myself a rare moment of satisfaction. Not pride, not celebration. Just the quiet knowledge that the work mattered. But the cost was accumulating in ways I hadn't anticipated. My apartment felt less like a home and more like a place I slept between shifts. I ate meals standing up, showering while reviewing reports in my mind, dreaming in threat matrices and probability curves. I was 43 years old and had never been in a serious relationship. Had never wanted one, really. The job had always been enough. Until the night I found myself standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m, staring at a photo on my phone. Emma and Jake, taken at Christmas, wearing matching sweaters, their faces bright with the kind of joy that comes from not knowing how complicated the world really is. I set the phone down and poured a glass of water I didn't want. "What are you building this for?" The question arrived unbidden, unwelcome. "Who are you protecting if you're not part of anyone's life?" I didn't have an answer, so I went back to work. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March, 2 years and 4 months into the assignment. My team had been tracking a developing situation in Eastern Europe. Intelligence chatter suggested a planned attack on a U.S. embassy. We'd narrowed the window to a 72-hour period, but couldn't pinpoint the exact target or timing. I hadn't slept in 38 hours. My vision blurred at the edges. Coffee had stopped working 6 hours ago. Sarah Kim approached my desk hesitantly. "Admiral, we've done everything we can with the data we have. Maybe it's time to escalate and let State Department make the call." I shook my head, scrolling through intercepts again. "There's something here, I can feel it." "Admiral, with respect, you've been staring at this for 16 hours straight. You need to rest." I looked up ready to snap and saw genuine concern in her eyes. Not fear of a superior officer, worry for another human being. The fight drained out of me all at once. "You're right, I'll take a break." I left the building, drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, ended up parked outside a coffee shop I'd never been to. Went inside, ordered decaf because my hands were already shaking. Sat in a corner booth and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd been in a public place, with no mission objective, no meeting to prepare for, no crisis to manage. The cafe was full of ordinary people living ordinary lives. A couple arguing quietly over wedding invitations. A college student with textbooks spread across 2 tables. An older man reading a newspaper, his coffee gone cold beside him. I envied them. Not their jobs or their problems. Their ability to just exist without the weight of classified knowledge pressing down on every moment. My phone buzzed. "Sarah, we found it. The pattern was in the financial transactions, not the communications. Embassy in Prague. Window narrowed to tomorrow, 1400 to 1700 local time." I closed my eyes, typed back. "Send it up the chain. Good work." Then I turned off my phone for the first time in 2 years. I sat in that cafe for 3 hours, drank 4 cups of decaf, watched the world go by, let myself be nobody for a little while. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were 17 missed calls. I braced for catastrophe, but the messages were all the same. The embassy threat had been neutralized. Czech police, acting on our intelligence, had intercepted the attack team at a safe house. No casualties. Perfect operation. And I'd missed the whole resolution because I'd turned off my phone. For some reason, that made me laugh. A short, sharp sound that startled the college student at the next table. I'd spent my entire life proving I was necessary, that without me, things would fall apart. And here was evidence that the work continued just fine when I stepped away. It wasn't devastating, it was liberating. That night, I called Dr. Chen. "I need to talk to you about my contract renewal." Her voice was cautious. "You've got 8 months left on your current term. Is there a problem?" "No problem. But when this term ends, I won't be renewing." Silence stretched across the line. "May I ask why?" "Because I've spent 20 years being invisible. And I think I'm done." 3 weeks later, I flew back to Charleston. Not for a ceremony this time, just to visit. My mother opened the door and actually gasped. "Evie, you didn't tell me you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you." She pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual, and I realized how much thinner she'd gotten. How much grayer. "How long has it been since I was here?" She didn't answer directly. "Your father will be so happy. He's in his workshop." I found him in the converted garage, working on a ship model. The Bismarck, half-finished, intricate detail work that would take months to complete. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw the expression I used to dread, the one that said I'd interrupted something important. But then it softened. "Evelyn, this is unexpected. I can leave if you're busy." He set down his tools. "No, stay." We stood there awkwardly, 2 people who'd learned to be officers before we learned to be family. It's a beautiful model, something to keep the hands busy. Retirement is harder than I thought it would be. The admission surprised me. My father never complained, never showed weakness. "How long have you been retired?" 3 years now." 3 years. And I hadn't known, hadn't asked. "I'm sorry I haven't been around more." He shrugged, a gesture so unlike his usual military bearing it almost hurt to watch. "You're doing important work, I understand." "Do you?" He met my eyes, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Regret. "No, I don't understand what you do, but I understand that it matters and that you're good at it, better than I ever was at anything." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. "That's not true." It is. I was a good officer. I followed orders, did my duty, retired with honor, but you've done things I can't even imagine. Saved people in ways I'll never understand. And I'm proud of you for it. His voice cracked on the last word, even if I don't know how to show it. I sat down on his workbench stool, suddenly exhausted. I spent my whole life trying to earn this. You know that? I know. And now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it. He picked up a tiny piece of the model, studied it. When I retired, someone asked me what I was proudest of in my career. I said the ships I commanded, the men I led. But that was a lie. He set the piece down. I was proudest the day you walked into that ceremony hall in your dress whites, because in that moment, I realized I'd raised someone stronger than me, someone who didn't need my approval to become extraordinary. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Finally, he spoke again. Are you happy, Evelyn? The question caught me off guard. My father had never asked about my happiness, only my duty. I don't know. Then maybe it's time to find out. That night, David came over for dinner with his family. Emma had grown 3 inches since I'd last seen her. Jake talked nonstop about joining the Navy when he was old enough. After the kids went to bed, David and I sat on the back porch, watching the Cooper River reflect moonlight. You're leaving the job, aren't you? I turned startled. How did you know? Because you're here. The Evie who lived for the work wouldn't take time off in the middle of a deployment. He wasn't wrong? I've got 8 months left. Then I'm done with the classified stuff. What will you do? Teach, maybe. The War College offered me a position. Share what I've learned with the next generation. That sounds good. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what? For taking up all the space. For not making room for you. For being okay with being the favorite. You were a kid, we both were. Maybe, but I'm not anymore. And I should have said something years ago. We sat with that for a while. Your kids are lucky to have you. I hope so. I'm trying to do better than Dad did. Not that he was terrible, just blind to anything that didn't fit his expectations. Yeah. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Aunt Evie, will you tell me a story? I glanced at David, who nodded. Sure, sweetheart. I carried her back to bed, tucked her in. What kind of story do you want? One about you, about saving people. I thought for a moment. Once upon a time, there was a woman who worked in a room with no windows. Her job was to watch over people who were very far away, in dangerous places. She couldn't see them, and they couldn't see her. But she kept them safe anyway. Like a guardian angel? Sort of. But guardian angels are born special. This woman had to learn how to be strong, and it took a very long time. Did she ever get to meet the people she saved? A few of them. And when she did, they said thank you. But that's not why she did it. Then why? Because some things are worth doing even if nobody knows you did them. Emma yawned, already drifting. I think she's a hero. I think she's just a woman who did her job. But Emma was asleep. I stayed in Charleston for 5 days. Longer than I'd stayed in years. My mother and I cooked together, shopped for groceries, did ordinary things I'd forgotten how to do. On my last night, I found my father in his workshop again. I wanted to thank you. For what? For the salute. At the ceremony. It meant more than you know. He set down his tools, turned to face me fully. I should have done it 30 years ago. Maybe, but you did it when it mattered. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a small wooden box. I made this for you. Was going to mail it, but since you're here. Inside was a model ship, not a warship. A lighthouse tender, painted in Coast Guard colors, meticulous detail. It's the boat your grandfather served on, before he transferred to the Navy. I thought you should have it. I lifted it carefully, felt the weight of hours he'd spent carving, painting, perfecting. It's beautiful. You keep people safe in the dark? That's what lighthouses do. Seemed appropriate. I left Charleston the next morning with the model wrapped carefully in my suitcase and something lighter in my chest. Back in McLean, the work continued its relentless pace. But I moved through it differently now. Still committed, still precise, but no longer consuming every moment like fuel. I started sleeping 7 hours a night. Started saying no to weekend briefings that could wait until Monday. Started remembering that I was more than my job. Sarah Kim noticed first. Admiral, are you okay? You seem different. Different how? I don't know. Less like you're trying to hold up the world by yourself. I smiled. Maybe I'm learning I don't have to. 3 months before my contract ended, I received an unexpected visitor. Admiral Patterson, the man who'd promoted me to Rear Admiral, appeared at my office door. Admiral Caldwell, do you have a moment? Of course, sir. He closed the door, sat across from my desk. I've been asked to extend you an offer. 1 star up, Full Admiral, your own command. The words I dreamed of hearing for 20 years. The pinnacle of a naval career. What command? Pacific Intelligence Operations, Hawaii-based. You'd oversee threat assessment for the entire Pacific Theater. And the work? Mostly strategic, some classified operations, but nothing like what you're doing here. More leadership, less field work. It was everything I should have wanted. I need time to consider. Of course, but I'll tell you what I told the selection board. You've earned this 3 times over. Most officers would kill for this opportunity. I know. After he left, I sat at my desk, staring at the offer letter he'd left behind. Full Admiral, a command of my own. Legacy secured. But when I closed my eyes, I didn't see myself in Hawaii, running operations from a command center. I saw myself at the War College, standing in front of young officers, teaching them what I'd learned, sharing the lessons that had cost me so much. I saw myself with time to visit Charleston more than once a year, to watch Emma and Jake grow up, to build a life that existed outside classified briefings. I picked up the phone, called Admiral Patterson. Sir, I'm honored by the offer, but I'm going to decline. Silence. May I ask why? Because I've spent my whole life chasing the next rank, the next mission, the next chance to prove myself. And I think I'm done proving. You're walking away from a full Admiral star. I'm walking towards something better. And what's that? I thought about Emma asking for a story, about my father building me a lighthouse tender, about Sarah Kim worrying I was holding up the world alone, a life where I'm not invisible. But I'm not carrying everything either, where I can teach instead of just do, where I'm more than my rank. Admiral Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then I hope you find it, Admiral. You've certainly earned the right to look. My last day at Task Force Phantom was quieter than I expected. No ceremony, no speeches, just handshakes and hugs from the team I'd built. Sarah approached with an envelope. We took up a collection, got you something. Inside was a photo. My entire team, standing in front of our building, holding a banner that read, "Thank you for teaching us to see in the dark." I traced the faces, these analysts who'd become more than colleagues, who'd become proof that the work continued whether I was there or not. Thank you, all of you, for making this the hardest job I've ever loved. Sarah smiled. You taught us that the best leaders make themselves unnecessary. Mission accomplished, Admiral. I drove out of McLean for the last time on a Friday in September. The leaves were just starting to turn, the air carrying the first hint of autumn. I didn't feel sad, didn't feel relieved. I felt ready. Ready to be seen, ready to build something new, ready to stop proving and start teaching. The road stretched ahead, ordinary and infinite, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't know exactly where it led. That was okay. Not knowing was its own kind of freedom. The Naval War College sat on Narragansett Bay in Newport, Rhode Island, its brick buildings facing water that turned from gray to blue depending on the season. I arrived in January, when everything was frozen and the bay looked like hammered steel. My office was on the 3rd floor of Luce Hall, overlooking the water, smaller than my space in McLean. No secure terminal, no classified briefing room, just a desk, 3 filing cabinets, and a window that actually opened. I spent the first week learning names, 24 students in my strategic intelligence seminar, all mid-career officers ranging from Navy lieutenants to Marine Corps majors, 7 women, 17 men, every one of them looking at me like I held answers they desperately needed. The first day of class, I stood at the front of the lecture hall without notes. Most of you know my rank. Some of you know my career highlights, the ones that made the news 2 years ago. But here's what you don't know. I paused, letting them settle. For 15 years, I worked missions you'll never read about, saved lives you'll never hear mentioned, made decisions that if I'd gotten them wrong would have killed people. And through all of it, nobody knew my name. A female lieutenant in the front row leaned forward slightly. So here's my first lesson. Intelligence work isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being right when it matters most, and being willing to carry that weight alone. Over the following weeks, I learned their stories. The lieutenant, Maya Henderson, had served in Afghanistan, lost 3 members of her unit to an IED. She came to the War College looking for ways to prevent what she couldn't forget. A Marine Major, James Chen, had spent 6 years in counterintelligence, chasing threats that evaporated the moment he got close. He wanted to understand the difference between good intelligence and lucky guesses. I gave them scenarios I'd actually faced. Redacted details changed locations, but the core dilemmas remained. What do you do when you have partial information and no time? How do you weigh the cost of being wrong against the cost of being too late? They struggled, made mistakes, learned. In March, Maya stayed after class. Admiral, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How did you deal with knowing that people's lives depended on you? That if you missed something, they'd die? I sat on the edge of my desk, considering how to answer honestly. I didn't sleep well for about 12 years, developed an ulcer, went to therapy twice, and quit both times because I couldn't talk about the actual work that was causing the stress. Her face fell slightly. So you just lived with it? No. I learned something that took way too long to understand. You can't carry it alone. The moment you try to be the only person standing between chaos and safety, you've already failed. She absorbed that quietly. But you were alone for years. I was, and it nearly destroyed me. Don't make the same mistake. In April, the commandant of the Naval War College called me to his office. Rear Admiral Thomas Blackwell, a submariner with 30 years of service, and the kind of gravitas that made junior officers instinctively straighten their posture. Admiral Caldwell, I've been reading your course evaluations. I brace for criticism. Your students love you, but more than that, they're learning in ways our traditional curriculum doesn't teach. We'd like you to design a new course for next academic year. On what topic? Leadership in the shadows. How to command without recognition. How to make life or death decisions that no one will ever know you made. It was the course I'd needed 20 years ago. The course that might have taught me I didn't have to carry everything alone. I'd be honored. That night, I called my mother. We'd fallen into a rhythm of weekly conversations. Nothing deep but consistent. How's teaching? Harder than I expected, but good. Your father asked about you yesterday. The comment caught me off guard. My father rarely initiated conversations about anything emotional. What did he say? He wanted to know if you were happy. I told him I thought you were. Am I? The question hung between us. You sound different, Evie. Lighter. Less like you're holding your breath. Maybe I am. After we hung up, I sat with that observation. Lighter. When had I started carrying so much weight that its absence was noticeable? In May, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, Spectre. I opened it carefully, half expecting spam. Admiral Caldwell, you don't know me, but you saved my husband's life 8 years ago. Operation Deep Current. He was one of the 8 SEALs pulled out of Somalia. He came home because you sat at that computer for 39 hours and didn't give up. We have 3 kids now. Emily is 12. Marcus is 9. Sarah is 6. They exist because you exist. I know you've probably moved on from that work, but I wanted you to know that somewhere in Tennessee, there's a family having dinner tonight because of you. We say your name in our prayers, even though we don't know what you look like. Thank you for our life. Jennifer Morrison. I read it 5 times. Then I wrote back, Jennifer, thank you for writing. Your husband's courage made my job possible. I hope your family knows how much he sacrificed to serve. Please give Emily, Marcus, and Sarah my best. The world is better because they're in it. With gratitude, Evelyn. These messages arrived sporadically. Every few weeks, someone would find a way to reach me. A wife, a parent, a child who'd grown up with stories about Spectre, the invisible guardian who brought their father home. I saved them all in a folder I rarely opened but couldn't delete. In June, David called. Not our mother, not a family emergency, just David. I need advice. About what? Jake wants to join the Navy. He's 15, obsessed with the Naval Academy. But I don't know if I should encourage him or try to steer him somewhere safer. Why are you asking me? Because you've done this, you've lived it, and you've seen what it costs. I leaned back in my office chair, watching sailboats cross the bay outside my window. What does he say when you ask him why? He says he wants to serve something bigger than himself, that he wants to make a difference. Then you already know the answer. Those kids who join for glory, for adventure, they wash out. The ones who make it are the ones who understand it's about something beyond themselves. But what if something happens to him? Then something happens, and you live with it. But David, you can't protect him from his own calling. Trust me, I spent 30 years trying to earn my father's approval by becoming someone I wasn't meant to be. Don't do that to Jake. Silence on the other end. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of pretending we can control everything. After the call, I sat in the quiet of my office, realizing I'd just given advice I still struggled to follow myself. July brought the end of the academic year, and with it, a different kind of emptiness. My students graduated, dispersed to new assignments. Maya Henderson was heading to Naval Intelligence Command. James Chen to Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. They came by my office one last time before departing. "Admiral, I just wanted to thank you," Maya started, then stopped, emotion catching in her throat. "For what?" "For showing us that intelligence work isn't just about data, it's about people. Real people with real lives depending on us getting it right." James nodded. "And for teaching us that asking for help isn't weakness. I've spent 6 years thinking I had to solve everything alone." I stood, shook both their hands. "You're going to do incredible things, both of you. Just promise me something." "What's that?" "When it gets hard, when you're sitting in a windowless room at 3 in the morning trying to make an impossible decision, remember that you don't have to carry it alone. There are people who understand. Find them." They promised. I believed them more than I'd believed my own promises to myself at their age. August was quiet. The War College ran a condensed summer program, but I wasn't teaching. I spent the time writing curriculum for the new course, designing case studies, pulling from missions that had been declassified enough to discuss. One afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Patricia Chen. "Admiral Caldwell, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. How are you?" "Well, I'm calling because we have a situation. Not a crisis, but something unusual. We've been tracking an emerging threat pattern in the South China Sea. Nothing urgent, but it's showing signatures similar to something you worked during Operation Trident Veil." I felt the old instinct kick in, the pull toward the problem that needed solving. "You want me to consult?" "Only if you're willing. I know you've moved on from operational work." I stood, paced to my window. The bay was calm today, sailboats drifting lazily. "Send me the files. I'll take a look." "Thank you. And Evelyn, we miss having you in the field." After she hung up, I sat with those words. "We miss having you in the field." Part of me missed it too. The clarity of mission, the satisfaction of solving impossible puzzles, the knowledge that what I did mattered in immediate, measurable ways. But another part of me knew that if I went back, even for a consultation, I'd be pulled in deeper. One analysis would become two. Two would become a formal assignment. Before long, I'd be living in windowless rooms again, carrying weight I'd worked so hard to set down. I opened the files Dr. Chen sent, spent 3 hours analyzing them, wrote up my assessment, 13 pages of detailed analysis with recommendations. Then I sent it and closed my laptop. "That's all I can give," I whispered to the empty office. "The rest belongs to someone else now." In September, my father had a heart attack. The call came at 6 in the morning, David's voice tight with controlled panic. "Evie, it's Dad. He's at Charleston Medical. They're saying it was a significant event, but he's stable." "I'm on my way." I threw clothes in a bag, drove 7 hours straight from Newport to Charleston, walked into the cardiac unit still wearing the jeans and sweater I'd slept in. My mother sat in the waiting room, smaller than I remembered. Her hands knotted in her lap. "Evie." She stood, hugged me hard. "He's in recovery. They did an emergency bypass. The doctor says he'll be okay, but it was close." "Can I see him?" "In a few hours. He's still sedated." I sat beside her, took her hand. David arrived 30 minutes later with his family. Emma and Jake sat quietly, scared in the way children get when adult strength proves fragile. The doctor came out at noon, tall man, kind eyes. "Mr. Caldwell came through surgery well. The next 72 hours are critical, but we're optimistic. He's awake now if you'd like to see him. Family only, one at a time." My mother went first, then David. Then unexpectedly, my father asked for me. I walked into the ICU, past machines that beeped and hummed, to the bed where my father lay connected to more tubes than seemed possible. He looked old suddenly. Not the invincible captain I'd grown up fearing, but a 76-year-old man who'd just faced his mortality. "Evelyn." His voice was rough, dry. "Don't talk, you need to rest." He shook his head slightly. "Need to say something, in case I don't get another chance." "You'll get plenty of chances." "Maybe, but let me say it anyway." I pulled a chair close, sat. "I was wrong. About you. About what I thought you should be. I spent your whole childhood trying to make you fit into a picture I'd drawn, and when you didn't fit, I erased you instead of redrawing the picture." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, because you deserved better. You deserved a father who saw you, not the daughter he thought he wanted." Tears ran down his face, caught in the oxygen tube taped to his cheek. "You became something extraordinary, not despite me, but in spite of me. And I'm so damn proud of you, I don't know how to carry it." I took his hand, careful of the IV. I know, Dad, you showed me at the ceremony with the salute. I know. But I want you to hear it. You are the best thing I ever had a hand in creating, even though I tried my hardest to destroy it. We sat in silence, his hand in mine, machines tracking the beat of his damaged heart. Finally, I spoke. When you get out of here, I'm going to teach you something. What's that? How to stop carrying everything alone. How to let people help you. How to be weak sometimes. He almost smiled. Thought that's what I was teaching you. We're learning together. Better late than never. He squeezed my hand. Better late than never. My father spent 2 weeks in the hospital. I stayed in Charleston the entire time, sleeping on my mother's couch, visiting him twice a day, helping navigate the chaos of recovery. In the quiet hours, my mother and I talked in ways we never had before. I should have stood up for you more, she said one night, both of us too tired to pretend. You did what you could. No, I didn't. I let him erase you because it was easier than fighting. I'm sorry for that. I forgave you a long time ago, Mom. Maybe, but I'm still sorry. During the second week, Jake asked if he could talk to me alone. We walked through the hospital garden, late summer flowers already starting to fade. Aunt Evie, do you think Grandpa's gonna die? Not from this, he's too stubborn. Jake managed a weak smile. But eventually, right? Everyone dies eventually. Eventually, yes. He kicked at a stone on the path. I'm scared of that. Of people I love dying. Is that stupid? No, that's human. Did you ever save someone you loved? In your job? The question caught me unprepared. Not directly, but I saved people who were loved by their families, their friends. That's close enough. How did you deal with knowing you might fail? That they might die anyway? I stopped walking, turned to face him. I didn't deal with it. Not well. I just kept working, kept trying, and hoped that being good enough meant being good enough. That sounds exhausting. It was. That's why I stopped. But you saved so many people. And I nearly destroyed myself doing it. There's a balance, Jake, between serving something bigger than yourself and sacrificing so much of yourself there's nothing left. He absorbed that, mature beyond his 15 years. Is that why you became a teacher, to find the balance? Partly, and partly to give other people the tools I wish I'd had, so they don't have to learn everything the hard way like I did. My father came home in late September, weaker, humbled, but alive. I stayed another week, helping my mother manage his medications, his physical therapy appointments, the 100 small indignities of recovery. The night before I left for Newport, he asked me to sit with him on the back porch. We sat in matching rocking chairs, watching the Cooper River turn amber in the setting sun. I'm going to retire from the models, he announced. Why? Because I've been hiding in that garage for 3 years, building ships instead of relationships. It's time to stop. What will you do instead? Maybe I'll learn to cook. Your mother's been doing all the work for 50 years. Seems like my turn. I smiled at the image of my father, who'd commanded ships and men, learning to make lasagna. I think that's a good plan. He rocked slowly, gathering words. I want to know about your work. Not the classified parts, but what it felt like, what it cost you, the things I never asked about. Why now? Because I realized something in that hospital bed. I've spent my whole life measuring my worth by what I did. Captain Caldwell, the man who commanded ships. But when I was lying there, thinking I might die, none of that mattered. The only thing I regretted was the time I wasted not knowing my daughter. So tell me, help me know you. And I did. For 2 hours, we sat on that porch, and I told him stories. Not the heroic moments, but the cost. The nights I couldn't sleep, the relationships I never built because I was always working, the person I'd become in isolation. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. Just listened. When I finished, he said only, I'm sorry you had to do that alone. I'm not alone anymore. Good. October brought a new academic year and new students. I taught my regular strategic intelligence seminar and launched the new course, Leadership in the Shadows. 26 students enrolled. The first day I gave them an assignment. Write about a time you succeeded at something important and no one knew. Not your commander, not your family, not your friends. Something you did that mattered and stayed secret. They struggled with it. Most military personnel were conditioned to report everything up the chain of command. The idea of meaningful work that stayed invisible felt wrong. A week later, I read their papers. Every single one had found something. A junior officer who'd prevented a training accident through careful planning that no one noticed. an intelligence analyst who'd caught an error that would have resulted in bad intel reaching operators. But the correction happened so quietly, no one knew it had almost gone wrong. We spent the semester exploring what leadership looks like when no one's watching. When there's no promotion waiting, no medal, no recognition. It was the most honest course I'd ever taught. In November, I received an invitation to speak at a conference in Washington, Women in National Security Leadership, hosted by Georgetown University. 500 attendees expected. I accepted, then immediately regretted it. Public speaking had never been my strength. I'd given a handful of talks, always to small groups of officers who understood the context. But 500 civilians and military personnel looking to me for inspiration? I wrote and rewrote my remarks a dozen times. Everything sounded either too self-congratulatory or too self-deprecating. The night before the conference, I called David. I don't know what to say to these people. Tell them the truth. Which truth? The one where I was miserable for 15 years but saved lives? The one where I finally found balance but had to give up operational work to do it? Both. Tell them it's complicated, that there's no perfect path, that you can be successful and struggling at the same time. When did you get so insightful? I have a smart sister. Some of it rubbed off. The conference was held in a hotel ballroom, chandeliers catching light, 500 faces turned toward the stage. I walked to the podium in my dress uniform, 3 stars catching the spotlight. I didn't use the prepared remarks. Most of you know my story, the parts that made the news anyway, the invisible analyst who became a Rear Admiral, the woman whose family didn't know what she did for 15 years. I paused, letting them settle. But here's what you don't know. I almost didn't survive it. Not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. I worked myself into the ground trying to prove I belonged, trying to earn recognition from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth seeing. The room was utterly silent. And when I finally got that recognition, when 300 people stood up and saw me for the first time, you know what I felt? I let the question hang. Empty. Because I'd spent so long chasing their approval, I'd forgotten to ask if I even wanted it anymore. Someone in the front row leaned forward. So here's what I learned. You don't serve for recognition. You serve because the work matters. But you also don't have to destroy yourself to prove you belong. Those two things can coexist. I spent 15 years carrying weight alone because I thought that's what strength meant. Now I teach young officers that asking for help is how you survive. The hardest lesson I ever learned is this. You can be indispensable to the mission and still not sacrifice everything to it. Those aren't contradictory. They're both true. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. But more than that, people came up after, sharing their own stories. Women who'd given up careers for family and felt guilty. Women who'd chosen career over family and felt guilty. Women who were trying to find balance and failing and feeling guilty about that too. I told every one of them the same thing. There's no perfect path, just the path you choose. And you're allowed to choose differently tomorrow. December brought snow to Newport, and with it, a surprising peace. I'd been teaching for almost a year now, had students who were thriving, had family I actually knew, had started to build a life that existed outside mission briefings and classified files. On Christmas Eve, my phone rang. Dr. Chen. Evelyn, I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday. Not at all. What's happening? Nothing urgent. But I wanted to tell you that the threat pattern you analyzed in August, we followed your recommendations. Just successfully disrupted a major operation. No casualties, minimal publicity, exactly the kind of outcome you always aimed for. I'm glad it worked. Your analysis was critical. I wanted you to know that. Even though you're not in the field anymore, you're still saving lives. After we hung up, I stood at my window, watching snow fall over the bay. The water was dark, the sky darker, but the snow caught light from somewhere, making everything glow faintly. Still saving lives, just differently now. Through students I'd trained, through analysis I could do without drowning in it, through a model that didn't require me to disappear. I thought about the girl I'd been, sitting on a porch in Charleston, trying to understand a world that didn't make space for her. She'd grown into a woman who didn't need space made for her anymore. She made her own. Christmas Day in Charleston was chaos in the best way. Emma and Jake tearing through wrapping paper. My mother cooking enough food for an army. David and his wife trying to maintain some order. My father sat in his recliner looking healthier than he had in months. He'd taken up cooking as promised, made the stuffing this year. It was oversalted and slightly burnt, but we all ate it and pretended it was perfect. After dinner, Emma climbed into my lap. Aunt Evie, when I grow up, I want to be like you. Like me how? Strong and see your, I laughed, smoothed her hair. You can be strong without being secret. That's the better way. But you were secret. I was. But I'm not anymore, and that's even better. She thought about that. Can I tell you a secret? Of course. She leaned close, whispered. I want to join the Navy too. Like you and Uncle David and Grandpa. But I don't know if girls can do that. Girls can do anything, and the Navy needs more people like you. Like me how? Smart, brave, willing to ask questions. She beamed, scrambled off my lap, ran to tell Jake her plan. My father had been watching. You were good with that. I just told her the truth. Something I wish someone had told me at her age. Someone should have. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Finally, he spoke. I'm proud of who you became, Evelyn. But I'm prouder of who you're still becoming. The words settled into my chest, warm and weighty. Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know. New Year's Eve found me alone in my Newport apartment, by choice. I turned down invitations to parties, to gatherings, choosing instead to sit with the quiet. At 11:45, I poured a glass of wine, stood at my window overlooking the bay. The water was black, the sky clear, stars scattered like broken glass overhead. I thought about the year ending, about how much had changed and how much still needed to. I thought about the work I'd done, the lives I'd touched, the price I'd paid, and the parts I'd reclaimed. At midnight, fireworks erupted over the bay, brilliant and brief. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. To becoming visible, I whispered. To learning that strength isn't about carrying everything alone. To teaching the next generation what I wish I'd known. The fireworks faded. The bay returned to darkness. But the stars remained, steady and infinite. I wasn't invisible anymore. But I wasn't drowning in visibility either. I was something better. I was balanced, seen when it mattered, private when I needed to be, and finally, after 45 years, comfortable in my own skin. The road ahead was uncertain, but uncertainty, I'd learned, was just another word for possibility, and I was ready for whatever came next.